Today we are going to be looking at the area of intention to create legal relations. Once there is proof of an offer, acceptance and consideration, the final requirement for the formation of an enforceable contract is the necessity to demonstrate an intention to create legal relations. Take the following conversation as an example. Hi Margaret. Oh hi, how are you Jill? I've not seen you for a while. No, I was busy with the children and then myself and Jim went away for a short break. Nice, I would love to get away if I could, but there always seems to be something to do. Why are you so busy? Well, I do a lot of work in the parish for the vicar, and then I hold my coffee mornings every Wednesday. Why don't you let me host a coffee morning for you? Would you? That would be great, and if you want, I will babysit the kids for you and Jim some evening. Okay, Jill, you've got a deal. Does Jill and Margaret's agreement take the form of an enforceable contract? Margaret made an offer. Jill accepted it. Both provided consideration. Thus, all the elements necessary for a contract are present. All the elements, that is, except the last requirement, an intention to create legal relations. In order for a contract to come into effect, the parties must intend to create legal relations between them, to intend to make an enforceable contract. In the unlikely event that Jill sued Margaret for not hosting a coffee morning, the court would have to ask itself, did Margaret and Jill, when they were having their conversation, intend to create a binding contract with legal consequences? Or were they merely having a conversation with no legal consequences intended? It is probable that, given the context, a conversation between two friends, and the non-commercial subject matter of the agreement, a promise to host a coffee morning and to babysit sometime, that a court would find that there was no intention to create legal relations between the parties, and thus there was no contract between them. Indeed, it is by reference to the context of the agreement and its subject matter that the courts normally decide whether there was an intention to create legal relations. In this regard, the courts have created two categories of agreement: domestic agreements and commercial agreements. In the case of domestic agreements, there is a general presumption on the part of the courts against a finding of an intention to create legal relations. For example, an agreement to meet someone socially for a drink is not considered to give rise to a contractual obligation. In the case of domestic agreements, the courts consider that the parties do not normally intend legal consequences when they make an agreement. However, this is only a presumption, and even if the agreement is a domestic one, where the subject matter is of a commercial nature and where the parties could or should have envisaged legal consequences, then the agreement will be considered legally binding. Let's take a look at the case of Balfour and Balfour. In this case, X worked in Ceylon, or Sri Lanka as it is called today. He accompanied his wife Y home on a trip to the United Kingdom. At the end of the trip, Y decided to stay in the United Kingdom and X had to go back to Sri Lanka alone. When he was leaving, X promised to pay Y £30 a month. He subsequently failed to make the payments and Y sued him for the arrears. The court considered that the wife's action should not succeed as the parties, as husband and wife, probably never intended or contemplated the establishment of legal relations between them. The court was particularly influenced by the fact that the parties were husband and wife. However, in the case Parker and Clark, the defendant Clark, who we'll call Y, and his wife were an elderly couple living in a large old house near Torquay in the United Kingdom. Mr. Clark's wife, i.e. Y's wife, had a niece who was married to a Mr. Parker, who we shall call X. As Y and his wife were having difficulty meeting their household expenses, they came to an agreement with X in order to help them to defray their household costs. Under the agreement, X was to sell his own house and along with his wife to go and live with Y. X and Y would then share the household expenses, and pursuant to the terms of their agreement, when Y died, he was to leave the house to X's wife, i.e. the niece of Y's wife. X sold his house and with his wife moved in with Y and his wife. However, the two couples did not get along and Y decided to repudiate the agreement, claiming that there had been no real intention to create legal relations between himself and X, as their agreement was, above all, a domestic arrangement. The court held that just because the arrangement concerned a domestic matter did not automatically mean that there was no intention to create legal relations. For the court, there was only a presumption against the intention to create legal relations, and that each case had to be decided on its facts. Looking at the facts of the present case, the court considered it inconceivable that X would have sold his house on the basis of a mere social arrangement, and that there was a contract between the parties, despite the domestic nature of the agreement. Now let's look at the area of commercial agreements. Unlike domestic agreements, in the case of commercial agreements, there is a presumption in favor of the parties intending to create legal relations between them. However, just as in the case of domestic arrangements, this is only a presumption and can be rebutted depending on the facts of each case. However, the burden of proof as regards rebutting the presumption is a heavy one and may only be discharged by clear evidence demonstrating that the parties did not intend to create a legally binding agreement between them. As is frequently the case, the test as regards the establishment of an intention to create legal relations is an objective one, and so the courts in each case asked themselves whether a reasonable man would have considered legal relations to exist in each particular case. Let's look at the case of BBL and the ANI. In this case, Spedley Security Limited was a wholly owned subsidiary of Spedley Holding Limited. ANI had a 45% shareholding in Spedley Holding Limited. Spedley Securities Limited applied for a €5 million loan from BBL. The bank, seeking some form of protection for the loan transaction, contacted ANI and asked them to guarantee the loan. Instead, ANI agreed to write BBL a comfort letter. In the letter, they stated that the ANI were aware that Spedley Securities Limited were borrowing the money from BBL and that they were in agreement with this transaction. That it was not their intention to reduce their holding in Spedley Holdings Limited until the loan was paid off. That if they did sell all or part of their interest, that prior to so doing, they would give 90 days notice of any such intention, allowing BBL to ask for the loan to be repaid within the 30 days. And finally, that it was their practice to ensure that the obligations of their affiliate companies were met as they fell due. A further clause stating that the letter was not a guarantee was removed from the letter on BBL's insistence. Later, in response to poor market conditions, ANI sold their shareholding in Spedley Holdings without giving BBL notice, and shortly thereafter, Spedley went into liquidation and were unable to repay the loan. BBL sued ANI for damages on the grounds that they were bound by the terms of their comfort letter. The defendant considered that the comfort letter did not, however, impose any legal obligation on them, and although they had a moral responsibility to BBL, no actual contractual liability had been created by the letter. Rejecting an earlier approach of the UK courts in the area of comfort letters, the court stated that if statements are appropriately promissory in character, the court should enforce them when they are made in the course of business, and there is no clear indication that they are not intended to be enforceable. The court was of the opinion that there was a prima facie presumption of an intention to create legal relations in the case of documents exchanged in a commercial transaction, and that it was for ANI to rebut this presumption. For the court, the specific nature of the undertakings, namely the promise not to reduce their holdings and a 90-day warning period, were intended to confer a benefit on the bank, and BBL had a right to seek compensation when they were not respected. In the opinion of the court, there should be no room in the proper flow of commerce for some purgatory where statements made by businessmen after hard bargaining and made to induce another business person to enter into a business transaction would, without any express statement to that effect, reside in a twilight zone of merely honourable agreement. We hope you enjoyed this introduction to the area of intention to create legal relations.